Afternoon. Today's Wednesday, April 25th, 2018. This is a special meeting of the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. Thank you all for your attendance. It's 3:30 and we are located here at Vets Hall in Morro Bay. We have a quorum established. 6 of our 7 members are present. Dawn Addis is absent. And I will now call this meeting to order. First thing, do we have any committee member comments or announcements, presentations, etc.? I'll start at my left. John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I have some comments on an item that was on last night's council meeting on the consent agenda, and that is in regards to approval to spend $14,665 from Measure Q funds to pay for a cost overrun on the sidewalk project, which was paid for primarily through CDBG funds and also local impact fees. And I don't want to make any comments about the merits of it, but just to comment that this project started back before Thanksgiving. I think it was finished by Christmas. And here we are 4 months later, and this committee doesn't know anything about it. So it seems to me that there was a communication breakdown and not the best way to proceed through that. And so I hope that management can analyze that and hopefully this process or progression won't happen in the future. That ends my comments.
Noted. And I will add to that one of the council members did reach out to me on that, and I was also had the same question. I don't believe we discussed that at our last meeting. However, what I did advise him that from the chair's perspective here, that this time that was certainly okay to do, because in our January presentation to City Council, there was approximately 72,000 we thought at that time underrun in Measure Q for this year. In previous years, every previous year back, we have always recommended, the committee has recommended that go to streets repair. This year, we changed our recommendation to please consider that in the mid-year budget review. So based on that assumption, I kind of gave a go. But anyways, I support my colleague's comment that should presumably come to us first. And even if we can't do a meeting, we can certainly still do it by email or something. So thank you for considering that. Any other comments, announcements? Walter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an announcement of a more general nature. I just want to invite the community, all Morro Bay residents and the Morro Bay community at large, to join us out at the Morro Bay Boulevard Roundabout on Saturday, September 28th. We'll be continuing the cleanup of the roundabout there as Morro Bay and Bloom volunteers have been working the past few sessions to get the roundabout cleaned up. And your participation would be greatly appreciated. We're going to be joined by some members of the Kiwanis Club on their International Day of Action. So it would be nice to have a lot of people out there. We're really making progress there, and we're hopeful that soon we'll be able to start planting and start filling in those areas that don't have plants. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. John, anything? Thank you. Okay, that brings us to public comment on any items not on the agenda. Any public comment at this time? Seeing none, I'll close that. We will go on to the consent calendar. Item A1, that is approval of the minutes of the March 20th, 2018 CFAC meeting. I didn't see any updates or corrections. Did anybody else? No. Can I have a motion, please, to approve those?
I'd like to motion that we approve the minutes of the March 20th, 2018 meeting without revision.
Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Walter. All right, so that was moved by Dave Baton, seconded by Walter Heath. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Item B1 is a brief finance department update on the OpenGov and provided by either Jennifer, the senior accounting tech, whom I don't see here. Go ahead.
Val's going to actually give the update on this.
Oh, okay.
She's been taking the lead while Sandy and I have been in the depths of budget. So she's had the conversations with OpenGov and has been doing the most recent work on that. So
Yeah, I've been working with OpenGov, and so we've made progress. The chart of accounts is established, the structure there, we signed off on that. We've uploaded the balance sheet information that we have, and we've been working on a template to include our vendor information on a report there, so that would basically replace the accounts payable reports that Jen provided.
I'm sorry. Val. That was practice. That's why I asked ahead of time.
I know.
Check.
Maybe Jen would you like to sit here?
That's one, too.
She's already gone.
Because she's not going to get a camera. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that,
Okay, so for OpenGov, we have approved the chart of account structure in the system. We've uploaded the balance sheet information, and then we're working on a template to upload with each accounts payable check run. So that will have vendor information, dollar amounts, expenses. So I think that's going to be really useful once we have that template up, but it looks good right now. I'd say probably 1 or 2 more check runs and we can have that live.
so do you think there's going to be any required testing from your personnel or staff, or you'll just go live, or where are we on that?
We've been doing
approximate?
some testing as we go,
Okay.
spot checking numbers and figures and making sure they match, but it's pretty smooth as far as the upload. It comes directly from our finance software, so once she provides the templates to do that upload, it's pretty seamless.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you very much, Val.
thank you.
Test 1, 2.
All right, any questions, members, comments on that? Go ahead, John.
The only question I had, I seem to recall there were some options in that contract you were proposing. Are you going to be exercising them, or do you think you will be able to do without them?
I think you're referring to the option to have it automatically integrate with our software without having to go through the download process. It has been pretty smooth, so I'm not sure we'd get the efficiency out of that, in relation to the cost, but we'd bring that back in a few months if we felt, once we get it going. There's so much work we have to do. I shouldn't say that. There's enough staff time involved in getting stuff uploading, checking it, having the conversations with OpenGov on the formatting and how it needs to appear, that I don't think we get any benefit out of it at this point. Once it's set up the way that the community wants it, the way the staff feels is functional in the city, it might be more of an automated process in the future, so we may come back at that point. I think it was like $3,000 for integration.
Okay, thank you. I thought there was another one for like $5,000 to $8,000. I can't quite remember that one either.
There was a 10-year historical upload and a 5-year historical upload, and we recommended and went with the 5-year. So if at some point we needed past data uploaded, I don't remember how much that cost, but there was another option for that.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. All right, that brings us to item B2, the discussion on the Measure Q proposed budget for the 2018-19 fiscal year. That would be beginning July 1st, 2018. This could be a continuation of some of the discussion at our last meeting when we had presentations from Public Works, Fire, and Police on some of their requests. So So let's go into that. Now, Jennifer, you have received some questions, a couple of us, citizen, et cetera, and you've compiled them all together. And some of them are on Measure Q, so I want to kind of go over those questions first, obviously.
Would it be helpful if I give just a general overview of what's in the Measure Q budget?
Sure, yeah, if it's, yeah.
So the Measure Q budget is based on the most recent sales or transaction tax estimates provided by HDL. They're forecasting for 2018-19, $1,083,000 in transaction tax. Of that amount, the police we're proposing to allocate about $101,000 to the police department. That's for some of the traditional items they had, such as the bomb task force training that they received through the sheriff, and standby pay. The standby pay amount is $24,000. That is increased from the prior year's request. That was, I believe, 13. And then there's a couple new additions in lieu of the SRO officer position. Those are body-worn and in-unit cameras for $22,000. To be clear, that's something that we do have right now. They're outdated, they're not performing well, and they, in one instance, I think that's being held together with electrical tape. There's a definite need for those. It's beneficial from the DA's perspective in processing and proceeding with cases. And these are the more modern units that provide better footage and are more reliable for use in prosecution. So that again is $22,000. There's a admin sergeant position in $16,500, and that's the incremental cost to pilot that program for 1 year. The department has been asked to think creatively about their staffing, how to get more people on the streets, doing proactive policing, and be more creative in that structure, especially as we know going forward we're going to have challenges. So this came out of a project that one of the sergeants did for a leadership training class. She did some analysis on that, provided a very compelling case that it was worth a pilot experience to see if we could achieve the efficiencies that they believe they will be able to. The idea is that it will help to increase the number of hours of patrol on each shift. So the $16,500 is the assignment pay, if you will, for 1 year to promote a senior officer to that admin sergeant position. Secondly, but in addition, there's the computer-aided dispatch contract. That's $24,000. That is one of the questions that came in, Chair, that you were speaking to. The comment was that something that's been previously funded in the general fund, so how does it qualify for Measure Q? It's a fair statement. If you think of enhancement as being something in addition to, then it is not an enhancement. We pushed back on every department in the city that had general fund positions. The direction was there's no general fund ad for staffing. People were not allowed to present staffing options that would impact the general fund. There's needs that every department has in terms of staffing, and we didn't feel that we could sustain that. So to the extent that there were positions added in the budget, they've been cost neutral to the general fund in some fashion or another. The department has a need for a records clerk to handle records that come in. The reason that CAD got pushed to Measure Q was to help fund that position. The recommendation is going to be for the records clerk to also be a 1 year to see if we can sustain it as an ongoing basis. I think it would be appropriate to maybe put that $24,000 incremental cost towards the records clerk for that 1 year if the committee felt more comfortable with that. Alternatively, there's other equipment needs, such as emergency preparedness, tactical equipment, that could be reallocated if the committee wanted to have a further conversation about that. The fire department Measure Q budget is $470,000. That's consistent with prior years in that it's the debt service for the fire station, the salary and benefits for the relief and overtime to maintain the minimum staffing level. And then there's some PP&E, which I think has been in the budget prior years for $27,600. The additions are $60,000 to help fund the purchase of a new fire engine. A substantial amount is going to come from the donation account for the down payment, $275,000. There's going to be use of impact fees of about $73,000 to help with the down payment, and then $60,000 from Measure Q. And then there's potential for $14,000 in matching grants. The remainder of $501,000 is allocated towards the pavement management plan, so that'll all go to streets work. And that will be supplemented with the SB1 money, which is about $191,000, and some Cal Recycle grant money, that $35,000, thank you. So that's just kind of a summary of what's been proposed. The departments are here and they can answer specific questions if I can't, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a couple general comments, and then with respect to everybody's time, we'll start with probably fire, police, and public works and go through. We will have some questions, I think, for our personnel. So the general comments that I sense from what I've seen, the questions that are coming in and the citizens, is that the Measure Q fund is finally increasing at a good pace, which is reflective of our tourism increase and the positive economy. There's always been some concerns, at least in my 8 years serving on this committee, in two main areas. And number one is in the actually using Measure Q for personnel labor fund. And we've always done it for the fourth firefighter relief position. Then that was discussed with council in detail. And the second thing was the school resource officer, but it wasn't, most of the funds are always for equipment, street repair, service on the debt service on the fire station, the things that were very clearly stated in the ballot measure. And anytime we try to use it for some labor that should or has been paid by the general fund, that has not been received, in my opinion, based on feedback, very well, other than the two exceptions. So that's one thing I consistently hear. And then I also consistently hear, or we have for years, of the need for streets repair, and which is why we always usually put the extra funds in street repair. So it seems like as the Measure Fund Q revenue increases significantly, so should what we are allotting to streets. Because as has been stated in the past, we need to be spending, if we want to get our streets up to competent level or a PCI of 70, we should be spending 1.5 to 2 million a year, and we're right now in the 500,000 plus. And even though there's additional monies coming in from Senate Bill 1 as well as a fuel tax, Measure Q was over and above what the general fund and what our general tax revenues would support. So having said that's where some of the concerns are coming in. So let's have a discussion here. Maybe we should start with the fire department, okay? So we may have some questions for you, Chief Knuckles. Just pass the mic on, and then maybe you'll get off the hook, maybe not. So. Okay, so that expenditure in fire is going up significantly this year. So, and it's for I think the big thing is the fire engine, which you alluded to last time, 5 years at $60,000 a year. So, I'll start with Bart, and do you have any questions or comments on that? And then go to, okay, Dave, I know you do, please.
Yes, I do. I have concerns in two areas on the purchase of the fire engine. One, I believe, is Measure Q related. The other one is not necessarily Measure Q related. As far as the Measure Q part of it, my concern is using Measure Q funds to pay finance charges. And I understand that the city doesn't have a capital asset replacement fund for vehicles, or for anything else for that matter. But the way I look at it is Measure Q funds used to pay finance charges become unavailable to be used to buy additional equipment or labor that would benefit the city. It goes to a lender. And I'd like to know if it's possible to borrow that amount from the general fund emergency reserves and pay it back over time with Measure Q funds, rather than going to private financing. So that's the first area. You want me to go to the second one, or you want to take care of that one first?
So we could do an interfund loan, and we'd have to draw up like a promissory note, just like we would any other loan. It would have to be at a interest rate that, competitive interest rate or market interest rate, but we could do that if the council approved it as well.
Okay, just so I understand that there still is an interest rate charged for borrowing from the general fund emergency reserves?
I could do some research and see if there is a way to get around that, but every similar note I've ever done has had the requirement of having an interest charge to it. You're paying interest to yourself.
Okay, all right. And then the second area that I'm concerned about, which isn't necessarily Measure Q related, is that when the chief spoke to us about this last time, that he was going to request a sole source award for the purchase of this fire engine from Pierce Manufacturing. And sole source purchases are typically done when an item or service is unique in the marketplace, has constrained supply, or there are some other mitigating factors that preclude competitive bidding or using an existing cooperative purchasing agreement. And I understand fire trucks are complex pieces of equipment. They're often built to order based on the end user's specifications and requirements. They're a major capital investment that's critical for public safety. They have a long service life, typically 20 years or more. So it's a long-term investment. And I definitely want to see the fire department acquire a new fire engine that meets or exceeds their performance, operational, and maintenance requirements. I don't want to see them take a shortcut on anything that's going to not meet their needs. What I'd like to see, if the chief is going to pursue a sole source purchase award from the city council, which I believe they'll have to approve that, I would like to see a written justification that includes objective reasoning why we're buying this engine sole source from Pierce Manufacturing, because there are other manufacturers in the marketplace. It's a limited number of manufacturers for fire apparatus, but there are other manufacturers that probably could provide an engine that meets or exceeds the city's requirements. So I would like to see some objective reasoning as to why the city would do a sole source award to Pierce. And I'd also like to see that include some kind of cost and price analysis, comparing other manufacturers, and also providing, if there's cost reasons why a Pierce engine needs to be purchased. I'd like to see that included, because I want to make sure that there's reasonable justification that this purchase is in the best interest of the city and also in the best interest of taxpayers. I don't want to see the department overpay for a fire engine when they could have bought one that would meet all of their requirements for less money. So that was my comment.
Thank you. That is a great question. And our department has had multiple different vendors of apparatus, and the main goal of our apparatus is to make sure it lasts 20 to 25 years. There is other manufacturers out there that can be less expensive than Pierce engines, but in the long run, when the repairs and the maintenance of our apparatus are extremely lower with Pierce apparatus, and I'll give you a good example. We just received our OES engines that's owned by the state of California. It's a HME brand. They purchased this last go-around, I think, about 30 engines, and we got one of them. The last one it replaced was only 17 years old, and it was ready to go because of the quality of the apparatus. As you look at our general fund, we don't have a robust budget to put $20,000, $30,000 into our engines every year, which it can happen. Those last few years, this has been happening with engine 5391, which is a Pierce Lance engine. It's a 1,500 GPM pump on it. Up till about 2 years ago, it was doing exceptionally well, passing its pump test every year. Just as happened as last week, extended the life of the engine for 5 years because it was doing great. We did have a major blow of the engine on a fire that we had 2 years ago. We replaced the motor, and now we're having some pump issues because of the age of the engine. It's done its job. It responded to 30,000 incidents. It was first out for 12 years. For 22 years, it was first out for our city. So it's done its job, and I guarantee if it was not a Pierce, we would have a hard time keeping that thing on the road. That's the main reason why we're looking at Pierce, both effectively and also financially, long-term, because we have to look 20, 30 years down the road how much these engines are going to cost us. Yes, I do a single-source memo or staff report to the City Council. Our department has done 4 of them in the past for Pierce Manufacturing, and we'll be doing the same exact thing. I definitely can produce a memo for the city manager to review and the finance director to review now for you to review to give to you guys for that option.
I'm sorry, you said you already did the memo, or was that in the past for the same end?
We've done it in the past, and we definitely easily can produce another one.
Okay.
The plan is if when the budget is approved, the Measure Q is approved by the City Council, that we're going to move forward because it does take 9 to 10 months to make an apparatus, and the staff report will be presented to the council in July.
Okay, thank you. John, comments?
So on the fire truck, between the 3 funding sources that you mentioned in here, it looks like the total is about $648,000. Is that right? Ballpark?
With tax and license and all that, it'd be 678. I do believe, I do have a team of 4 people ready to go to start working with the manufacturer, and I may be able to even get that price down lower with some of the things that, modifications and cost-saving issues that we can come up with.
Okay, so about 30,000 more than what we have here on the narrative. So the money from the Bertha Schultz Trust, $275,000, is that available immediately, or is there something the city has to do to obtain that?
We have that available in an account that the $1.4 million was placed into. The $1.4 million has paid for complete purchase of our ladder truck, 5341. Also, it purchased a complete new self-contained breathing apparatus that were basically 2 years out of compliance for us. The city had no direction on the funding or identified funding to repurchase that. And then it'll be $275,000 towards the down payment of engine 5391. And also in addition, it's helping with a new mandated software data collection that's mandated us by Affordable Health Care Act for all our paramedic calls, for all our patients. It's helping us with that this year.
Okay, thank you. And then the impact fees, are those impact fees that would be collected next fiscal year, or are those already available?
Those are available now.
Okay, thank you. So on this engine, the only thing I would say is that, like Barbara had mentioned, that this would lock up $60,000 a year in Measure Q money for 5 years, which is going to basically come out of the amount available for road work. So, and this is something for the city council to decide, but it seems to me that if, in order to avoid the interest expense to the Measure Q, which just adds more money, more cost, if the acquisition of the fire engine is a higher priority than the road work, I would recommend that the fire engine be purchased outright and that the road work be deferred until the following fiscal year, rather than lock up that money for 5 years plus interest costs. And that's my only comment on the fire engine. I mean, 25-year-old fire engine, yeah, it sounds like it's probably time to replace it. I do have a couple other questions, though, on the fire department budget, and one has to do with the relief firefighter, and it's about a 10.5% increase from last year. And I just wanted to confirm that there's no additional hours involved. It's just really salary and benefits escalation that are causing that.
Do you want me to go ahead and answer that? That's correct. There's no additional total hours in the Measure Q request. Actually, there is a reduction in the overtime hours for full-time, because I will be getting, I have a firefighter, I'm short one firefighter now on workman's comp that will be retiring. And as soon as I get my numbers back up, I can start using reserves again on some certain shifts and some staffing patterns, which does save money.
Okay. So what happened here this last year, or this current year, I guess, was that the side fund on the CalPERS was prepaid. And I guess this would be a question for Jennifer. So that is done now, right? But it actually had one more year to go, and it was paid a year early, is that right?
There was 2 payments in 18-19 and then one in 19-20, so we prepaid it 2 years early.
Okay.
I think 170-ish thousand each year.
Okay, so then the rate that is paid to CalPERS is actually going to go down because the side fund percentage will no longer be there, but basically what happened there was that the general fund paid for that, and Measure Q should have paid for it. If you had not prepaid the side fund, then those costs would have been part of this.
We did
Labor
not
cost?
that's correct, but we did not, in doing budget, take into account the fact that it was paid for, so the PERS rates were not adjusted down, with the idea being that we should pay that money back to our reserve fund, because we know the next year, 1920 and 2021, those costs keep going up.
Right.
So we don't want to get comfortable at a lower level than we're going to be able to sustain in the long term.
Okay,
So Measure Q is essentially being charged the same rate as if we had not paid down the side fund.
okay, all right.
I guess I add to that, overtime is not PERSable, so to the extent that that's an overtime.
Okay. I think that's all I have for the fire
On
department.
the fire, okay. So Jennifer, if I understand that, we wouldn't see these big increases in the fire department personnel costs in future years. It's more an anomaly?
You're still going to see increases, like we'll see in all of our,
I mean, the small 2% or 3%.
so
yeah.
we don't have updated actuarials since paying
Okay.
off the side funds, so I don't know the exact percentage, but if our classic fire rate was going to be 60%, we paid a significant piece of that off, so it will likely go down to 45-ish%.
Okay,
We didn't
okay.
budget for 45%. We budgeted at 60.
60.
So at year end, savings will flush out, and that will essentially reimburse the reserves for that payment.
Okay, so that helps. Generally, that's good news for the fire department budget. All right, so I have a couple questions for you. If we were to procure this, however, you had mentioned you were paying $20K plus more a year in maintenance on a 25-year-old engine. Would the maintenance costs ongoing for a new engine be significantly less that would allow you to start putting an equal amount into a capital replacement fund so that we're not having the same conversation down the road? Would that help?
Oh, it would, but I don't have the $20,000 for the maintenance in the general fund. My maintenance for my vehicles are, up till the last 2 years, has been around $8,000 a year for all my apparatus. So if we did not purchase engine that would be available by 2019, we would have to do pump repair and engine repair again on engine 5391, that would be between $21,000 and $22,000.
So this is cost avoidance as opposed to cost savings?
That's a great way to put it.
Okay. All right, that's not what I wanted to hear, but I get it. Okay, so on the other thing, the Bertha Schultz Fund or whatever, let's say you were able to put a significant larger down payment down, and then there's a 9 to 10 month, production, and pay it off maybe in the next year or so. Would you be able to reduce the price, or whoever's negotiating this, maybe if you're putting 60, 70% down, no interest, and reduce the cost that way, coupled with what you said, maybe you might reduce cost through less technical features?
So one of the great things with Pierce Engines is if you enter into they call it a lease option payment plan, 5-year plan, that they will take, usually because they get all the money up front from the lending company, plus our down payment. By doing that, they actually reduce the cost of the engine $20,000 to $25,000 right off the top. And that's usually just that pays for the tax for that engine, because we do have to pay sales tax on that apparatus. So we're looking at that. We've done that before. In the past, we've used Measure Q to purchase 5392 and rescue 5351, but we did it with surplus funds that were from Measure Q, and we put it like in the accumulation, put it on the side as accumulation, and then when we came to the purchase, when we received grant funds for 5391 or 51 for half of it, we're able to then take the funds out of Measure Q one time and purchase it. We did the same thing with engine 5392. But I can't wait 5 years on this one piece of apparatus. I'm afraid the cost will continue to go up. There's a reason why National Fire Protection Agency states that you need to replace your engines at 20 years. I don't believe all engines need to be replaced at 20 years. You got to look at what the engine's doing, how it's performing, if it's passing its tests. And that's why we extended the life of engine 5391. Even though we put in 2 years ago $23,000 into a new motor, that $23,000 we're still way in the black by extending the engine's life for 5 years. Our next big purchase of an engine, we're looking at 2031, 2032. Bertha Schultz really helped us out by helping us purchase some of our large items, such as SCBAs, such as a ladder truck, and now a pretty good hefty down payment on engine 5391. Bertha has made a big difference in our community and our general fund financing to make this possible. So we're pretty fortunate on the large apparatus. This will be the last purchase for the next 12, 13 years for our large apparatus.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for right now. Thank you. Walter? Go ahead.
My question has more to do with where we are, and since John brought up the topic of road repairs, where are we in terms of the 2-year cycle and blending the $500,000 to make $1 million so that we can justify doing so that we can get a contractor out here to do road repair? Are we in the first year or the second year? Where are we, or is there a half?
We've been doing it every year now, but that's...
Yeah, or is there a $500,000 coming from the general fund to do that?
Because of the way we entered into our contracting arrangements with pavement coatings using the indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery method, IDIQ, we locked in some better prices, so there was no need to wait every 2 years. So we're planning on a streets rehab work this coming year also. We sometimes refer to this as paving, but we haven't really paved in a couple of years. We do maintenance coatings, cape seals, microsurfacing, chip seals. We did South Bay Boulevard paving through a SLOCOG grant, but paving is 8 to 27 times more the cost than these maintenance coating processes that we use.
Thanks, Rob, but basically we're locked in by a contract to kind of continue on with the method that we've been using, and if we were to interrupt that, there'd be consequences.
No, we're not locked in. We write contracts in our favor, so we can terminate for convenience.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions, John?
Yeah, this may more, who handles making sure sole source purchases are consistent with state regulations?
Well, per the city's purchasing policy right now, the finance director is the only authorized purchasing agent. So if that's the case, then I would have to make sure it complies. I'm not sure in the past if, typically I'm used to seeing like legal review and sign off if there's a request for a sole source. I don't know that that's been the case in the past year. Chief, he's shaking his head, yes.
I remember that about 2005, there was a little scandal in Sacramento where Oracle got a sweetheart sole source deal, and me working for the federal government, I got a good laugh out of it, but I was assuming that the state legislature would have done some stuff to assure things like that didn't happen again. Are you familiar with any of the regulations the state has for procurement?
I haven't done sole source in a while. I am expecting to see that there's some standardization justification for the sole source and why that's necessary, what the reasonings are, and that's something that in the past the attorneys have signed off on before it's come to finance, but I'll let the chief speak to how it's been handled in the city before.
We did produce a staff report that gets reviewed and approved by the city attorney, then by the city manager, then brought to the city council, and also through the city finance director. As chief, I've only been part of one sole sourcing, and there was a lot of check boxes I had to make sure that was completed and make sure it's valid. The whole purpose of sole sourcing is, for our small department, is to reduce future costs and give us a piece of equipment that can run 30,000 calls. Not all equipment can run 30,000 calls without major repairs, and a great example is the older OES that was only 17 years old that was in the shop this last year for 6 months prior to being replaced by the state of California. And that engine is probably about $100,000 cheaper than a Pierce engine, but that $100,000 can go away pretty fast down the road when I have to repair the pump or the engine or replace parts.
And then usually there's some sort of factor within the estimate for your sole source which kind of says this is why it's cheaper. Is it maintenance? Your maintenance estimate which provided the savings you needed, or was there other things which helped provide savings for the sole source?
Well, there's two things: maintenance costs and future maintenance costs, but also the availability for operations. Because my key goal is to run calls and keep those tires running. And every time we take an engine off the road, that's 1,500 gallons of water per minute I'm not going to have available for fires. So my goal is to keep my 3 pumpers in operation 365 a year. And so there's two major factors: maintenance and operational effectiveness.
Is that operational effectiveness, life safety?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to my comments that I neglected to earlier. It sounds like, Chief, you're going to give us a memo with your sole source justification similar to what you would do for the city council. Is that correct?
That's from, especially coming through Measure Q. I imagine I can have it ready for the May meeting for you.
Okay. Could you also include in that memo, or the staff report, some kind of an analysis about the financing cost and a comparison of alternates, like, for example, if we can borrow from the general fund and there is an interest expense associated with that, can you compare that with the financing that's available through Pierce? Because my understanding is this financing that you're seeking as part of this award would be coming from Pierce, who's probably working with a lender of some sort. I'd like to see a comparison of the cost and the terms of that Pierce financing compared to what else the city might be able to do, like borrowing from the general fund, emergency reserve, or possibly even the state revolving fund, if that's a possibility too. I'd like to make sure that that financing that we would be getting from Pierce is competitive with any of these other choices. And if it's not, if it's more expensive, why go that way?
Great, that's a great question. I'll definitely work with Jennifer very closely. One advantage, we're looking at a 3.2% right now if the loan was signed today for the remaining balance of the engine. But along with that 3.2, that we're able to get a $20,000 cut off the top too. So we'll add that in and the cost analysis also. I'll gladly work with Jennifer and put in a report for the May meeting.
I just want to clarify that we could bring something in May, but it would be to provide feedback to us, and that the council will not have adopted a budget yet. So we don't know that we'll have, appropriation to actually purchase the fire truck, no matter what the financing is. And then secondly, if that's the direction the committee wants to go to, that should be part of the recommendation at the conclusion of this conversation for Measure Q.
I agree, and so for the fire budget, let me make one comment. I had a lot of experience with sole and single source justifications in the federal space, and typically the sole source is a little bit easier, meaning there's only one manufacturer that does that, everybody else is out of business, and you're documenting you can only get it from one source. The single source usually implies there's multiple suppliers, as in this case that could, or more than one, supply your purchased goods and meet your requirements, but for whatever reason, whether it's time, maintenance, future add-ons, features, whatever, it's more cost-effective to go with a single source. And I think the good thing about documenting that and working with Jennifer on that is then we don't have any citizens saying, well, we're not even competitively bidding these things. So that's kind of where we're coming from, I believe, from a citizen's perspective. So I didn't hear any other go ahead. On the fire, so we can close on the fire.
Yeah, I do have one question, maybe for Jennifer or for Scott. If we delay on a recommendation today, how does that play into the process? Because, not understanding, when does the city council meet to discuss budget, and might they be more favorably disposed to making the appropriation if they knew that we had already recommended that, the 60,000 come out of the Measure Q funds? I just kind of want to understand the process.
So the first, the proposed budget with all the parts that are missing from your budget, all the other funds and enterprise funds, is scheduled to go out Friday, this Friday. And then the first budget study session is May 8th, the second is May 9th, and then there's a week or so in between before the third, if we need a third. So we hope tonight to get some direction. That direction can be you approve as presented, you approve with some variation, you approve as presented, and would like to have, additional information brought back on financing options should the council approve the appropriation.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so is there any other questions on any of the other fire expenditures that were listed here for the Measure Q? The rest of them appear to be pretty standard. I think I did see somebody had a comment on the matching funds for a possible federal fire grant. They felt that belonged in the general fund as opposed to Measure Q. That one's $14,000. I don't have any strong opinion one way or the other. Most of my colleagues do.
I would just add that the matching funds for a grant in maybe more in broader context, the fact that Measure Q is an enhancement becomes a struggle when departments are very thinly, have very thin budgets for existing equipment or existing needs that are required to be had. And I think you're going to move into police next, so this will kind of be a nexus into that, where we have computer-aided dispatch. We have to have that. We don't have an ability to add enhancing equipment because we need to maintain what's required to have. So while that may be brushing that for this year and the future years, that's going to be a conversation with the committee and how we balance that enhancement versus just having equipment that we're required to have for safety or for, prosecution or those kind of things.
So in the case of this matching funds, then your staff would be expending the labor to write the grant or whatever to try to get the grant?
The grant is already written, and we're waiting today for approval from the federal government.
Okay, so you guys already did that, basically, is what you're saying?
We write grants throughout the year.
Okay,
And if we
okay.
have matching funds, we don't put it in the budget. We hope and pray that we get them into it, but this, if we do not get the grant, the $14,000 won't be spent.
Yeah, right, exactly, okay. So maybe somebody wants to make a motion that we approve the request, put some contingencies in there based on single source justification being provided that's acceptable to council, or anything else. I'm open for discussion, colleagues.
Are we doing a motion just to approve the fire portion of Measure Q? Is that what this, or are we going to do it all in one motion?
That's at your discretion. You can do Measure Q or as a whole with contingencies.
It's just a little bit
or
easier,
terms,
we're on
or-
this subject right now, I think, just to get that. And then if we do them all separately and they come out, the same motion, you can suppress the motion, amend it, but,
Well, one comment I'd make is on these two issues that I brought up, the sole source, single source, if you want to call it that, and then the financing issue, again, those are kind of, I look at the financing issue as being Measure Q related. The sole source, single source justification really is for the awarding body, which is the city council. This is going to have to go to city council for approval. They're going to have to approve the expenditure, and then they're going to have to approve actually doing a sole source award to Pierce Manufacturing. So I heard that we might get a report maybe as a dry run before the chief goes to city council on this, which would be nice, but again, is that something really that is in our purview to require? The financing part of it, I could see that needing more information before we actually, we'd want to put that as a caveat to approving it, but the justification part of it, I'm not sure that falls under our scope.
I kind of see where you're coming at, and I kind of agree with that definitely I can work with Jennifer on possible financing options, and you're totally correct that the council makes the final decision on the single source request.
you're right, but I think we're looking at maybe just making a recommendation, or so that we can move forward.
So for purposes of presenting to the council at the study session on May 8th, it would be helpful to have a recommendation regarding Measure Q. If you want to have an ancillary recommendation that the committee is interested in, sole source or single source, or the justification behind that, you're welcome to do that. Again, we relay that as, from the advisory committee, this is what was communicated during this presentation.
Well, Barbara, if we could just do this with one motion for Measure Q for, in the totality of it, I would appreciate that.
It is our role to approve the funds, right, from Measure Q. That's our job, right? Okay, so then what I would suggest is that we do that, and then just perhaps have a memo from the chair noting our concerns. Either it's straight up or down. This way we can keep things moving, but then weigh in with our concerns, because as Dave has said, ultimately those concerns are going to have to be addressed by city council. So if there could be a memo from the chair to the city council saying, we approve or don't approve, and want these concerns addressed in the course of your work, then that's one way of addressing it. I don't know if that's acceptable to the group, but that's one way of addressing it.
I don't have a problem with making this all just one motion at the end, but I do agree with where I think you're going, Barbara. Let's put a ribbon around what we're saying here. And I agree with the recommendations, as I understand them by David, that we're suggesting that there should be documentation for the single source, and they should explore options for financing in addition to what's there. And then we can go on. But those, as I understand, simply those are two things, and then we can vote on the whole thing at the end. But I don't have to go have this discussion again.
With the intent of minimizing the financing expense to Measure Q.
Yes, I mean, we're not going to be able to decide today if that's going to result in the 60,000 going to 30,000, but at least in that direction, that's what we're saying.
I would be in favor of that as long as we're not, by doing it as one vote, there isn't the chance that we would be holding up the appropriations for police and for public works and street repair.
Yeah. Okay, so we have the two issues, the documentation on the justification and the minimizing the expense to Measure Q. All right, so can we move on to then the police department, please? Okay, so, again, I think it was the same issue that we have standby pay and the one-year pilot, and then on the replacement of the body cameras, the ones we have now are supposedly in pretty bad shape. I understand that, but it also said in the verbiage on the police that as well as being up for contract renewal. Is that a lease of those cameras or something, or what is that?
That's a maintenance agreement associated with
Oh, okay. And when does that expire?
earlier this year.
Oh, it already expired? Oh, so who's maintaining them, or are we just hoping nothing happens?
We're duct taping.
Okay. Time is of the essence, get that. Okay, so I'll start this way. John, any questions on the police requests? Are you okay with that?
I had some questions about the cameras. As I understand it, this maintenance request you have for the, maintenance agreement you have for the cameras also comes with some proprietary software in order to manage the video and audio which comes off of it. How much of your current services budget request is included in that?
I'm going to defer to our sports services manager, Bonnie, on that for the detail.
Thank you.
So our current vendor for the body-worn cameras is known as L3. The cameras, we're out of maintenance agreement, so anytime that they break, we basically have to pay full price for them, or as stated, they're held together with electrical tape. They fail in the middle of recording. District attorneys have declined prosecution because they didn't have a clear image of the video. So we've tested we've interviewed 3 different potential companies for a body camera system. We're in a pilot program with a company right now who provides a maintenance agreement software, as well as all the videos are stored to a cloud software, where basically being able to redact out faces, images that shouldn't be seen when going to court, as well as being able to purge videos when they're due to be purged. We have that availability with the new system. With the current system that we have, we don't have the ability to do any of those things. We can't purge videos due to record retention policies. We can't redact out videos, and they're failing on a regular basis. So what we are requesting is the new company is a lease program where they replace the body cameras every 2.5 years, as well as an in-unit system. And the proposal is for $22,000 a year for the 5 years.
Okay. How would that compare to the competitors for the materials?
The other competitors, it is basically the same thing. The company that was next comparable price was $114,000 for the whole system, and it was not a lease, it was a purchasing system, which is what we currently have. And the problem that we see with that is that when you're at the end of the 5 years and your cameras don't work anymore, you're in the same position of buying new cameras, buying new software, etc.
Who owns the data at the end of the contract?
We do.
So you will have access to it. I heard I heard a discussion of that once, where at like 4 or 5 years ago, the contractor providing the services owned the videos, and they could deny access to the police department or the DA for that information. So that's not going to be a problem?
No, I made sure in the contract that we owned the rights to all the videos at any given time.
And also the software in order to access that?
It's a cloud-based system through Microsoft Azure, and so you basically have a contract with Microsoft Azure to hold the videos. This company that we're trying right now had promised that if we left, or if we decided not to go with that program, that they would download it to a hard drive and give it to us, and then we could store it on any cloud device that we chose to do, which would be our own Microsoft Azure program. If we chose to stay with them, and at the end of the 5 years, basically the same thing, we would own the Microsoft Azure account. They are basically the contract in between, but we would own the Microsoft Azure account that stores all the videos.
Are you prepared to do a sole source or a single source justification for the cameras that you want?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, if I can clarify, I don't think it's not sole source or single source. The pilot program is at no cost, I believe, and the department's been looking at piggyback options for other cities that have done the RFP process and have selected that. So we've been analyzing some of those piggyback arrangements.
Thank you.
You have anything? I don't have any further questions. Thank you. John?
So the only item that I had difficulty with was the $24,000 for the computer-aided dispatch data system. And the reason for that is because this is something that the general fund has been paying for all along. And so it's just a shift of costs going from the general fund to Measure Q. And I just don't think that that qualifies for the council-determined purposes of Measure Q, which is to enhance public safety. And so for that reason, I would not support that.
Thank you, John. Dave?
Can you explain the duties of the administrative sergeant and how having that position, which I assume is upgrading a sergeant's position to higher level pay, how that actually increases hours on patrol for the rest of the department?
I can. So increasing overall police efficiencies is an ongoing process, and we're constantly looking internally to evaluate efficiencies, productivity, and enhanced delivery of police services. Essentially now, we have on each shift 2 officers and 1 sergeant. The sergeant spends an inordinate amount of time, approximately 25 to 30% of his or her time, conducting administrative and liaison duties, as opposed to the more efficient use of allowing that sergeant to be out in the field along with the officers. So we're using a concept called force multiplier, which is essentially a police and military-based resource management concept that utilizes a combination of strategies to maximize its efficiencies. So what we're looking at is looking internally and figuring out how we can streamline our current sergeant duties to allow them to be out in the field more with the officers and therefore really address public safety better. Essentially, what we're looking at is moving many of those liaison duties to this administrative sergeant position, which is, it allows consistency. It's more appropriate for many of the liaison duties that occur during day watch hours. And so those sergeants, field sergeants, will be able to be out in the field, in essence, working along with the officers, responding to radio calls, providing supervision, giving direction on crime reduction strategies, and so forth.
Okay, thanks for that. Also, I had a question about the body-worn cameras. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of how the city does business. And this is a $22,000 lease agreement for 5 years. It's $22,000 a year for 5 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you have selected a vendor, a contractor for that?
We're in a 45-day testing process.
Okay. And so you have selected a vendor,
Yes.
and Ms. Callaway mentioned that you're in a testing, you're looking at cooperative purchasing options. I assume that would be for that one vendor? Is that correct?
Yeah, and just to clarify, the 45-day testing period, so they're not obligated to go with that vendor. This is a trial period to see if these cameras are functioning the way they've been sold to function, but it is based off of a competitive purchasing process that another city did, and I don't remember if it was a Atascadero or Bonnie probably has that information, but it was another city that went through an RFP process, and this was their preferred vendor, and we have the staff report from them to support that.
Okay, and their agreement with this vendor does authorize other agencies to utilize that contract?
From what I've seen so far, and I, to be frank, haven't delved into all the details because we've been in budget, but from what I've seen so far and skimmed through, they've committed to the same pricing and terms with us if we were to go with them. We wouldn't be able to do a piggyback arrangement if we didn't have the same terms as is in that existing agreement with the other city. So otherwise, we're going to have to go out to RFP.
Okay, well, I guess the basis of my question would be is that does their contract, their agreement with that other vendor, when they bid this with this requirement with that vendor, did they tell the vendor that we are opening this contract up to other public agencies?
I don't know that their agreement with the other city does, but they've committed, the vendor has committed to us the same pricing, so we do our own agreement. It would have the same pricing as the other city.
Okay. Well, my understanding is that a cooperative purchasing agreement is specifically bid to allow other agency participation. If it doesn't allow other agency participation, then it's basically an agreement that the agency has with that vendor, but it's just another bid, and there is no inherent ability in that agreement to piggyback it. If you're piggybacking it, you can say, yeah, we'll give you the same price and terms as this other agency, but is that really the best price and terms that we can, as a city, can get on that particular requirement? So that would be.
So I'll refer, I'm going to refer to the department, but I know they sent me the information, so I'll look through it. Well, unless Bonnie can answer, the chief.
So the current vendor that we're pilot programming with, they were on their way to the city of Folsom to do the same exact thing. They offer the same price to every agency that they distribute to, $7.99 per camera. I can't remember the price for the in-unit video, but their pricing is the same for every vendor that they sell to. The other two companies, it was based on needs, data storage, et cetera, et cetera. So there are three different companies that we're looking at. This one came in with the most competitive price and the most amenable features.
Okay, well, that was just basically, you went out and did a market survey and informal market survey and determined that.
Correct. And we've spoken to several of their references of all the different companies, all the different vendors that we're looking into.
Okay. Well, let me just throw out a recommendation. My recommendation would be run this by the city attorney and see if it does actually meet the requirements for a cooperative purchasing agreement, which allows you not to have to go out for competitive bid or to do a sole source justification for that. Because what I'm hearing so far, it doesn't sound like it is a cooperative purchasing agreement. Vendors often will, say, well, we sold our system to Atascadero for X number of dollars, we'll offer you the same terms, price and terms, But until you actually go out and do a formal solicitation, you don't really know if you can do better than that. Now, there are plenty of cooperative purchasing agreements out there that are set up by state and local government buying groups or even individual cities. When I was in purchasing with Santa Rosa, we did bids that resulted in contracts where other agencies within Sonoma County could participate in them, but it was specifically in the terms of the contract that they could do that. And then that made it legal for us to go ahead and do for other agencies to do a cooperative purchase, and we did the same thing. So I just suggest looking into that to make sure. The other thing is, if this does result in an agreement, it's $22,000 a year. Again, I'm just trying to understand how the city does business. Is that going to be looked at in total as far as an award? It's going to be the $22,000 times 5 as far as the total value of the contract, and that determines who gets to sign the contract? Is that how that would work?
Yes. So it would be the total value of the contract over the 5 years.
Okay, so in this case, it would be the city manager. It's within the city manager's award authority to sign that contract, to award it and sign the contract?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes, if you're committing to 5 years, that's normally how, that's good to know.
Oh, one other thing came to mind, sorry, Bart. What are the cancellation, if you do go into a contract here, what are the cancellation terms on it?
On the pilot program?
Well, the pilot program is for a limited period of time. I understand that there's no obligation under the pilot program, but if you enter into an agreement with this vendor for a 5-year contract, or 5-year lease, I guess is what it is, it's a lease contract, what are the terms of cancellation? When can the city cancel?
At any time.
Okay, so there's no...
We're not locked
bound.
into it is a 5-year purchasing agreement, but we can get out of it at any time.
Okay, thank you.
So the 5 years only fixing the price, and then you'll put some in the terms pricing protection in there. Okay, thank you. Go
Just
ahead, Bart.
Just a small nit on that, so I guess there's no escalation factor, so it's literally 5 times 22. One comment I'd like to make in the absence of our one member who's not here, who is very passionate about what's not in this Measure Q stuff, and I'd like to at least to go on record for her, for nothing else, since I held her up the other night. But Dawn is clearly very passionate about the school resource officer, which I realize I don't want to go into that discussion again. This is consistent with us agreeing that we felt we didn't want to keep that in our budget, since I'm not sure if it was PG&E or whoever was paying the other part of it. So this is consistent with that, and whether or not it needs to be in the discussion or not, but I think to at least acknowledge that we are making a conscious decision to not put in partial funding for the school resource officers. Well, I'm not changing anything, it's just a matter of I guess it's a statement. Thank you.
And I think Walter had one more. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, based on the other questions, I have 2 questions, and that is on the camera contract, is it likely that you'll be coming back to and wanting to use Measure Q funds for the successive years?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. And then also, I do support John's position with respect to the records clerk and the funding for that position. And there was some mention of the possibility of swapping that out budgetarily with tactical equipment and other things that would be more in keeping with what Measure Q funds are used. And I'm just wondering, would that be a doable thing for you, or is there really $24,000 worth of tactical equipment that could be swapped in, and then the records clerk paid for out of the normal general fund budget? Just wondering where what kind of hardship that would be for you.
It'd be a substantial hardship. We've really looked at our general fund budget, and it's been very difficult. The importance of that, the training portion of that training coordinator position makes it extremely essential for us in terms of training, oversight, and that type of thing.
Yeah. And I'm in total support of you for the pilot for the administrative sergeant position. I think that's an innovative use of it, and that's appropriate for Measure Q funds. Not as sure about the records clerk, and I'm very concerned about kind of, the erosion of the spirit of the Measure Q. But I just want to put that out there because, in terms of if we do agree to go ahead and approve the use of those funds or recommend the use of those funds for that purpose, that you consider a way of shifting that back into the general fund next year, because it is very tough for us. We're entrusted, with this fiduciary responsibility for seeing that the Measure Q funds are spent for the purpose for which it was intended and how it was sold to the voters.
Understood. So currently, our general fund does not allow for equipment purchases, and as a recommendation, we would ask that, I understand the position about the CAD and the difficulty and challenge in funding that position, but as an alternative, we would ask that you consider funding $24,000 of the training coordinator position that would maybe get us where we need to go.
Yeah.
In that.
Sure. Thanks for that, Chief. And as I said before, I really do support that the administrative sergeant concept. I think that really is, that's great thinking. In terms of the flow of work and how things happen, to have one person dedicated to the liaison and the administrative and enabling those sergeants, other personnel to be out in the field, I think it's a great idea.
Chief, we didn't get the budget yet for the Supplemental Law Enforcement Services Fund, but I'm assuming that you do a lot of your equipment purchasing out of the $100,000 a year that you get from the state for that COPS grant?
Correct, and that also includes our property clerk, evidence clerk position, so.
If I could
Which is
just,
substantial, that's $55,000, and definitely impacts our ability to purchase equipment.
yeah, if I could just elaborate a little bit on that, and this is going to kind of tie in with some of the other questions that came up with the consolidated maintenance aid positions. The city has had a practice of, we have an hourly exemption in our PERS contract, which allows for part-time workers to essentially work full-time hours and not be benefited. CalPERS is starting to crack down on that. In addition, it's not a very humane practice, if you will. I don't mean to be blunt about it, but you have a person working 40 hours a week that gets no benefits at a pretty minimum wage job, and a person doing essentially the same duties but benefited, working side by side. And that doesn't feel like that's the kind of culture we want to create for our employees. So Dana and HR have been doing a very good job of going through that list of part-time people who kind of falls under this hourly exemption that's really working as an FTE, meaning a benefited position, or what should be a benefited position, and how we're going to class those going forward, not only to comply with PERS, but in my mind, more importantly, to treat our employees in a proper way. The training, or the records, property and evidence person is one of those people. It's a 30 or 35 hour a week, I forget which now, position that's been unbenefited. So we have told the department that that position needs to be benefited. And to the extent that you can do that and not impact the general fund, you need to do it. So reduce the hours to compensate for the benefits, or put it in the SLUSIF grant. So when the chief refers to the $55,000, the position has always been funded in SLUSIF, but it's being more impacted now because of having to benefit that position. And that's the right thing to do. It really is. The records clerk is another position that has been and that one's 30 or 35. One is 30 and one is 35. And I ask Bonnie every time which one is which, because I keep forgetting. But that's the same thing. That person is working essentially at an FTE capacity without getting benefits. So we've done the same thing with that. The department has a need for that position to be full-time. We've given them the option to do that as a one-year kind of contract thing out of concerns for sustainability going forward, but that will be a benefited position at 40 hours a week. So when the chief refers to not having equipment money, SLESIV is being reduced because we're forcing them to benefit their part-time position, and that gives them $40,000-ish for equipment. We could take the items that are in the SLESIV grant or the SLESIV budget and fund those in Measure Q, and that's the emergency preparedness kind of tactical equipment needs. We could take $24,000 of that and supplement it for CAD. I think the CAD purchase would perhaps qualify under SLESIV. If not, we could probably move a piece of the records tech. We're doing a little bit of a shell game, to be frank. It's what qualifies where and where can we fund it, given the needs that we see.
Well, I mean, the fear that I have, and I'm thinking maybe some of us other folks on this committee have, is that what's happening here is that there's kind of a line being drawn that, okay, we're going to set aside roughly $500,000 for roads per year out of Measure Q, and no matter how much the sales tax revenue increases, that extra amount is just going to get eaten up by fire and police for things that otherwise would have gone to the general fund. And I just don't think that's a good approach. I think, as Barbara indicated, that as sales tax increases, the amount that's going to roads should kind of increase proportionally. And it doesn't seem like that is the approach that's being taken.
Do you want to comment or?
No, I mean, I think
Yeah.
the observation is fair. I'll say it's not an intentional decision. I think from department levels, they feel like they have these needs and they try to, the request from the police department's consistent with the amounts in prior years. But needs keep growing too, so that's kind of to be expected. I don't know that it's intentional, it's at least not intentional from the finance perspective, but it's obviously a fair observation, and that does seem to be the case. So.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I think where we're coming from is if there's challenges to the general fund, as we know there are, then I think you need to have the difficult conversation and make the tough decisions with respect to the general fund and not just use the Measure Q as a backup. And if it's in the pension liability primarily, then that has to happen with the negotiations, the benefits, the sick leave, everything, rather than or if we were putting into a capital replacement fund a couple years ago, I understand, then when there's a budget shortfall, we pick the low-hanging fruit, and as opposed to really trying to make some tough decisions. And that's what I think we're coming from. So the Measure Q is a separate tax. We even talked about going for another half-cent tax for the streets and that. So I think we have an obligation to show the citizens we're spending it on these additional things that we knew there would never be general fund monies to do that. And that's where we're coming from. So in summary, on the police, before we make a motion, I want to also go to Public Works. What exceptions do we have so that if we make a recommendation, what do you want me to include? I heard a couple of you say no to the CAD CAM, find something else. Is that the majority opinion here? That
I'm actually confident at this point that can be resolved, by city management. I'm kind of withdraw my concern as far as that goes. I think we kind of made our feelings known, and I think, from what I'm seeing, everything is being done that can be done.
okay. And I would include, so do we want to approve the police budget as requested? The one thing, David's recommendation, I would include there, run it by the city attorney. Is this a cooperative purchasing so that we don't have any issues with competitive bidding now that they're in the trial eval? Anything else that we want to?
Well, you know how I feel.
I know how you feel. So I need to know, the rest of you, are you okay with doing the CAD CAM or asking them to find some other equipment that makes it more in line?
I agree with Dave that that just in general, the, best practices need to be pursued with respect to is it a cooperative purchasing agreement, and whether things are being done, and if an RFP needs to be, or should be done, just to offer for the benefit of the public, we can see the comparison between the vendors more clearly than then that needs to be done.
Yeah, the computer-aided dispatch is maybe you could, Chief, maybe you could explain exactly what that is. Is that a subscription service that we pay to the state, or what is the computer-aided dispatch expenditure item?
So computer-aided dispatch is basically when somebody calls 911 and they speak to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher takes down all the information and puts it into a computer-aided dispatch system. It then transfers the information over to mobile data computers that are in each of the units, and it gives the officer information about where to go, who they're going to be contacting, previous contacts with that person. It can go to other mobile data computers in other units to aid in mutual aid. So if more officers than one officer needs to go to that call, they've got all the same information. So it's basically the communication that can't be transmitted through radio, phone numbers, warrant information, previous contact information, personal information that can't be transmitted through radio. So the computer-aided dispatching system is basically the communication between the dispatchers and the officers.
Okay, and this is something that is absolutely necessary for your operation, and it's something that you have now and you have had for years.
Correct, but
Okay.
we're requesting Measure Q to fund it so that we could fund the training coordinator position.
So just for my clarification, this is to pay for the communication, the data communications between dispatch and mobile data terminals inside the patrol cars, which is how the officers get dispatched.
Absolutely.
In addition to the radio communications. Yeah. So they're getting address information, maps, that type
Specific
of
background information on prior contacts, that type of thing.
thing. Okay. I guess I'd have to say, I think we need to be a little bit flexible as far as Measure Q is concerned, considering the budget challenges that we're facing. This is a necessary service for public safety, and I would be okay approving this. I understand the Vice Chair's concerns with the kind of the creep of moving general fund expenditures over to what should be general fund expenditures over to Measure Q. I think this is a vital service for maintaining public safety, which is part of the intent of Measure Q, was to enhance public safety. So I would be okay with this one. I think we need to be careful about it, though, in the future, about of including these types of expenditures against Measure Q in the future.
On a year-by-year basis, you think we should approach it on a year-by-year basis?
Yes, that's what we approve the budget every year, yeah.
Okay, so we would have...
You're not in a commitment, right, for any fixed-term commitment on this 24K thing, subscription, correct?
It's a payment we make to the Sheriff's Department every year.
Recurring cost.
Oh, okay. So you could not cancel that recurring cost?
No.
Okay, yeah, okay. Because you've been paying it in the past, too, so.
It's absolutely vital to their
Right.
service.
All right, then I'm okay with it, based on his explanation and yours.
Okay.
Anybody
I
else?
agree, but to echo what Dave said and what you started with, Barbara, as I recall, the wording in the measure talked about buying things, not salaries. In fact, it may have even specifically said this isn't for salary. So I think we do need, going forward, to be very careful about labor costs associated with this, and that we're not basically, it's like the lottery for schools. They basically had all this money, and then over time, it basically went away, got absorbed into the state budgets. So I'm I would support John, but I'm okay either way, and look in the future that it ought to be equipment that we're talking about here, like engines, fire engines, things like that.
Yeah, the computer-aided dispatch is a thing. I mean, it's that's so it's a services software thing, but it is part of our dispatch program with the sheriff. So when we converted to dispatch by the sheriff's department and are no longer hiring our own dispatcher, this is part of that package. So it is a recurring cost. It comes up every year, and from that standpoint, rightly belongs as a general fund expenditure. But, given budgetary situations, I would not like to see this come back next year. I would like to see that part of, the general fund budget for the police department, just as if the additional records clerk, works out and that pilot works out, I would like to see that salary as part of the general fund expenditure, just so that we can offer some guidance to these departments, because we have a lot of new people and they're not necessarily familiar with Measure Q. The Measure Q is really for kind of additional extras that are beneficial to public safety, or things that need to be done that just can't be funded by the general fund. And so in that sense, they are kind of one-time grants, if you would.
Right, and here's the difficulty with this is that it's not going to go away. Jennifer did a 10-year budget forecast, which just shows that the general fund deteriorates every year for the next 10 years. So, anything that gets added into Measure Q this year is going to stay there, and it's not going to go away. And in fact, next year, based on the 10-year forecast that Jennifer has done, there's probably going to be other things that are coming Measure Q's way. So again, you could do like Barbara said and make some tough choices now, or else the money available in Measure Q just continues to get eroded.
That's an excellent point. The 10-year forecast is depressing, and the 20-year is even worse. I think we're trying to be careful here, and these positions that the police department's brought forward are really pilots. I know that we're talking a year, but we really want to look at them at 6 months and see if they're achieving the objective, and then have a really robust discussion about what that means going forward if we want to maintain them. And this year, yes, brand new finance director and city manager, and really trying to take care of some things that were maybe mishandled in the past, and really just now coming around to looking to current day and hopefully into the future, so that we can really prepare the community and council for those tough decisions. Because while our economy is doing well, that could turn at any time, and we know what's coming with CalPERS. So we're definitely committed to preparing and setting a framework for council and the community to have those really important discussions about priorities, because I know we can't necessarily continue business as usual without some change.
Okay, so just for my clarification, are you saying if we approve this 24K included in the Measure Q, even though next year when you come back to ask for Measure Q, and you could have different players sitting here as well as anywhere else, we're already committing for the odd infinitum that we will approve this? I'm looking at it just this 1 year.
Right. No, yeah, it's not in perpetuity. It's really those positions we're talking about, which is creating this, and rightfully so, some angst with the committee. They're pilots, right? And if they succeed, then we're going to have to try to find a way to absorb it elsewhere, right? But that's going to necessitate tough choices, which the chair has mentioned, and you all are completely aware of. And so,
the reality is if they're using technology and they've replaced some labor in the past, we're generating some cost savings from this already, and so it rightfully should be approved. We're just hesitant to approve it, for the next 30 years. This isn't the fire station where we took out a 30-year mortgage, so. Okay. So are we okay with what do we think on the police budget, other than the one exception I heard about the cooperative purchasing agreement? You guys okay with the rest of it?
Yes, I am okay with the police budget as proposed.
Okay, thank you, Dave. The rest of you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay, thanks. All right, so that we can finish up Measure Q, what else? I think the last thing is the 501, almost 502,000 for the streets. Any discussion there? Go ahead, John.
Rob, I know we're on about a 5-year cycle of chip seals and stuff like that. Where are we in, how many streets have gotten a chip seal or micro seal so far? What percentage do you think has been done since we've started the pavement management program?
I'd estimate about a third of the streets in Morro Bay have been done with the chip seal program. The first real street that we did was Tide Avenue. In North Morro Bay. And we can see some issues with that. That was done in 13-14 time frame. That was the first triple layer that was done in town. Almost no prep was done to the street that we did. We've learned a lot since then. We've had our own internal forces doing potholing and skim patching prior to doing this maintenance surfacing. So we're getting longer life out of those streets.
Yeah, I've noticed Birch, I think it was between San Jacinto and San Joaquin, is beginning to have places where it's you're getting the little 1-inch square pieces of pavement breaking up in it already.
San Juan is a warranty issue. They're coming back to look at that and redo that section.
And how did that panorama experiment go?
Ponderosa?
Ponderosa, yeah.
We actually haven't got enough water on that street yet. We're hoping for some rain this year to see how it holds up with wet subgrade and garbage truck traffic on it. But it's really not full depth reclamation as we've talked about before. It's basically compacting base and ground asphalt and then putting a seal over the top of that. So it is I think it's a technique of last resort, really, for those streets that are so bad, but we don't have the money to do a full reconstruction on.
Okay. So we've got 4 more years of kind of doing this stuff, and then we'll start recycling, going back over the what we previously did. Is that a reasonable expectation?
Yeah, unless something changes with the funding method for streets. Like we talked about before, we're $1 million shy of really what it takes to bring all of our pavement conditions up to 70. We will start to see a drop in pavement conditions unless we start actually reconstructing streets, or in the north end of town actually constructing them as streets from the very beginning, because that's not how they were developed.
About how long before we get the streets in the same condition we started in a couple of years ago? Doing what we're doing?
I have that in a presentation that we gave to PWAB, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Okay, but
it's a few years, probably 5 years time, estimate 5 to 7 years.
Okay, so in 5 years, it's all gone and we get to start all over.
We start to drop again.
Okay, thanks. I guess I wanted to bring that up to let people know that it's, we have a situation where we're going to have dirt roads in 10 years, unless we do something about it.
Just to add to that a little bit, the other option is to look at doing road reconstruction. Unfortunately, the cost to do that is, depending on what technique you're comparing it to, between 8 and 27 times more than the techniques we're doing right now. So we're paying for slurry, microsurfacing, 60 cents a square foot for that. For a thin overlay is what we should be doing in those cases. It's probably $2.50 a square foot.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the street budget, or everybody's, go ahead, Bart.
I don't want to repeat everything we went through before, but I just encourage you to look for best practices. What you use as examples was we learned by what we had done. I certainly am hoping that, I mean, you can't look at Wisconsin probably because they've got different issues because of climate. But certainly there are new materials being developed, all the time. When we had this discussion before, basically a huge amount of the cost, I think, had to do with the asphalt itself and buying it, and the oil costs. But I just encourage the city to make sure we're looking at best practices all over. But other than that, I think we've gone through this discussion before.
We have. Okay, so I believe that concludes the discussion on Measure Q, item B2.
No, I've got a comment in general.
On
Q.
Okay. Go ahead.
Basically, what it says here, and depending on which document you look at, as far as describing Measure Q, if it's the actual ballot measure or whatever, it's a little different. But it includes pothole repair, improving storm drains to protect the bay from pollution. And then it's got this and other general city services, which means we could do anything. But I'd like to focus on the storm drains. I don't know to what extent storm drains are leaking. We certainly know sewers are leaking and possibly draining into the ocean. Our WIFIA loan applications mentioned in several instances specifically concerns about polluting the estuary. And it seems like that ought to be addressed. I mean, that's part of what Measure Q is. And even if we want to argue, well, we don't need any money, I think we have leakage issues. So it's not clear to me, as I mentioned a couple of meetings ago, why isn't that being addressed? I'm not aware. Or is it addressed in some other document, and therefore we want to exclude it from this part of Measure Q? Were we not serious about this part of Measure Q when we adopted it? But I'm not, I would think that that ought to be addressed.
I thought Rob may have addressed that recently, but can you address Bart's question, please?
Sure. We haven't done a storm drain master plan since 1987. As part of the One Water work, looking at our master plans. Okay. We have a master plan being prepared to give us recommendations on not just repair of our existing system, because I can guarantee you every existing storm drain that was put in probably prior to the 80s doesn't have a bottom in it. They were corrugated metal pipes, and they rust. Especially in a city that's near the ocean. They just don't last forever. The ones that we have replaced, that's what we find every place, is the bottom rusts out of it and backfill starts to drift as the water runs down that bottomless pipe. Typically, storm drains are funded through the general fund process because there's not a tie to an enterprise fund. We have used impact fees to replace storm drain. I know the Measure Q committee made a recommendation years ago that storm drain should be be included with the streets money, and then as we do major street repairs, we do the storm drain improvements along with those street repairs, because they go hand in hand. And that's the approach that we have been taking in North Main when we needed to improve drainage. We did cross-gutter projects with the paving project up there. So that was partially funded by Measure Q, partially funded when there was some ERA money around. So make best use of those funds. And some, I think, excess general fund balance in those good old days when that existed. So, yes, storm drains are important. I think we'll have a better handle next year when we're preparing the Measure Q on what improvements we need to make to our storm drain system. I don't know that we'll ever have enough funds to do, to meet all the competing needs of Measure Q. That might be a little editorializing, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
I had a question on that.
Go ahead, Dave.
On storm drains, do all the storm drains empty into the inner bay, the harbor area, or are any of them going out into Estero Bay?
There are some that go out into Estero Bay at the end of Atascadero Road by the existing wastewater plant. There's a storm drain at the end of that line that ends up onto the beach and then into Estero Bay. A few of them in north end of town end up in the coastal streams that end up into the bay. The majority of the storm drain system in kind of this area of town doesn't really start until Morro Bay Boulevard. We have a lot of cross gutter type storm drains where it might pick up drainage and then due to topographic concerns, it dumps back out onto the street and then goes down the street. As one of my mentors long ago told me, streets are just storm drains that are convenient to drive in sometimes.
Stormwater isn't treated, as far as I know. Is that correct?
Rudimentary treatment, settling is really the only thing that's done. We have at some of the storm drains before they get into the bay, silt boxes to collect that silt, and then we have a maintenance program that takes that out once a year. Most of our newer catch basins have sumps in the bottom of them, so we can clean those catch basins before they hit the bay. And then part of the storm drain program is, a requirement of that is our street sweeping program. So the regional board has mandated what our street sweeping levels that we have to maintain around town.
Okay, so there is some rudimentary separation of solids from the stormwater.
Yes, and most of the pollutants get tied up in the conventional pollutants, like the metals that come off of brake pads, get tied up in those sediments. A lot of the oils.
Yeah, oil. I assume I would think there would be some debris in there, some garbage that makes its way into the storm drain.
Yes, and we have a new regulation, our trash regulation, that we have to, over the next few years, we're going to have to put trash catchment on our storm drain system as part of the latest round of stormwater regulations.
And is that something that you're going to be funding through Measure Q? Or?
At this point, we have about 10 years to comply with the measures. Right now, we're just developing the plan and determining what those costs will be. We will have to fund it somehow. I'm not sure that 100% of it is appropriate for Measure Q.
So is there any expenditures out of Measure Q that could be done to meet this mandate to protect the bay from pollution as far as storm drains are concerned?
The repairing of storm drain pipes would prevent some sediment from getting into the bay. I think really what we need to do is look at this again once our master plan is prepared to determine what the level of treatment that's required. Right now, the TMDLs for that Morro Bay has is pathogens. And the way we generally deal with pathogens is try to prevent pathogens from getting into the storm drain system to begin with. And a lot of that is pet waste. That's why we spend an awful lot of money on dog baggies to the tune of about $10,000 a year. We have several pallets full of them, usually by a year. That's a large source of pathogens that end up in the bay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments on the Measure Q request for expenditures or anything before we make a motion or recommendation? Go ahead, John.
I just want to make one comment. Even though I'm opposed to this computer-aided dispatch being paid for with Measure Q funds, I'm going to vote in favor of this because I really trust Scott and Jennifer. I think they're doing a great job. They know way more about this stuff than I do. And I think you ought to be given a chance to get the city's finances in order. And I know that you're aware of the tough choices that need to be made, and you need to be given some space to get this thing done properly. So I'm going to vote in favor of it.
Okay, thank you, John. And I would agree on that, and based on the explanation and our discussion of what it is, I think we can pretty much all support that.
Could we at least ask for public comment? I don't know if that was advised.
I don't know if we, thank you, on B2, I'm not sure we did. Is there any public comment on B2? I can open it up. That's on the Measure Q expenditures.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Well, any of the others, as residents, I guess, could speak as well. So, okay, thank you. I'll close public comment on that. And thanks, Scott. All right, so are we ready to make a recommendation on this, or somebody want to propose something and, you know?
I would need to see the notes, what you took on there.
Oh, okay. Well, what I thought I heard is that you would like the chair to write a draft memo, and I would circulate it among all of us and then get it to you ASAP. And what it would say is that we are approving all the requests under the police, fire, and street as requested by those departments with, a couple of conditions. And the three items I noted is that first we would recommend that there is documentation for a single source justification from Chief Knuckles on the fire, the request for the engine, or the $60,000 for 5 years. And secondly, we would also like to see some analysis from staff working in conjunction with Chief on minimizing the finance expense. And our leaning would be more to borrow internally, like borrowing from your 401k. Even if there's interest there, it's going in some city fund, right? Where would that interest go? Back to the emergency risk fund, or?
Depends on where we borrowed the money from, but likely the general fund.
Yeah. And then we will negotiate with you on the interest rate to make it competitive, like we're asking them to negotiate on their requirements.
We'll have a conversation, yeah.
Okay. And then the third condition, which I'll put in there as best as I can, is that we also have a recommendation. We're supporting the CAD data lines, but we have or subscription, that we have a recommendation that you run that by the city attorney to see if that qualifies as a cooperative purchasing arrangement, thereby negating the need for a single or sole source justification.
On the body cameras.
Yeah. Or the body cameras.
yeah.
Oh, the CAD. Thank you.
That was the body camera.
Gotcha.
That was the body camera contract that Atascadero has with the vendor that's being trialed right now by the police department.
Okay,
and
got it.
Something I might add to that, too, I'd like to know if that contract was competitively bid.
Yes.
Just to clarify, I'm not 100% sure it was a Atascadero. I don't remember the city, but regardless, I know there was an RFP, and we can certainly provide that.
Okay, so did I capture everything? If I draft something and you guys will update it or approve it, I'll get it to you guys first. Is that okay? When do you need that, Jennifer or Scott?
Friday.
Oh, Friday, okay. Today's Wednesday.
By 5 o'clock, please.
Okay. We'll make it happen.
You're going to spend another weekend at work, eh?
No, I can't spend a weekend. She needs a Friday, which I guess is good. Yeah. No, she'll spend it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that concludes, I believe, item B2 on the Measure Q. Thank Thank you. Oh, yeah, do you want to, do we need a motion for that? I don't know that we, okay.
Do we need a motion? Yeah. Okay.
All right, John started to make a, what, you want?
Want me to do
I don't- Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to propose a motion here that we approve the amounts for, Measure Q expenditures, the proposed amounts, and with the provision that the chair send a memo to city clerk, city council, wherever it needs to go, that outlines the concerns as the chair has just indicated.
Somebody want to second that?
Second.
All right. Thank you, John. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, motion carries. Okay, so Jennifer, I'll get that to you, and is that right? CC Scott, maybe, or, okay, good enough. All right, so moving right along, we are now on item B3. This is the general fund operating budget. I guess the first thing is, we did have a lot of questions, and we sent them. They were trickling in, so Jennifer was kind enough to get pretty thorough answers on many of them. That's helpful. You may want to also forward that on to city council members. That would, I think, help them in preparation now that they're all gone. Okay. That'll help them in preparation for their next meeting.
I just want to, there were two questions that I don't have answers for in the responses. One of them, it's the worst case scenario for animal services agreement, and that's referring to the reference made of Paso and Atascadero back out of the cooperative agreement. Our cost would go up. And then the second one is what is the other proposed expenditures of $86,247. That's in contract services, Department 3115, which is behind the city administration tab. I think actually those two are connected, which is why I'm going to talk about them together. A little embarrassed to admit, I'm looking for my notes, but I actually believe that the $86,247 is the amount it would cost us if Paso and Atascadero back out. So essentially it's double counted in there, which made me very happy to hear that. So it would be a possible funding source for the fee study when we get the RFP back for that. There's some other things that have remained unfunded that will be listed in the transmittal memo. So it might be a pot of money set aside, but in the meantime, I've also called the representative at SLO to confirm that that's the number.
I'll add real quick, the county kind of formed not a task force, but just a working group amongst the county, Atascadero and Paso, to explore the shelter. And it seems like they're making really good progress. The most recent update I got last week is that they're hopeful. Of course, the councils and the Board of Soups have to approve it, so for each of those respective jurisdictions, but the city managers and the county administrator are working really hard together to come up with a compromise that will not only benefit those that'll stay in, but also potentially see cost savings for Morro Bay instead of a cost increase.
Okay, and then there were some questions on the capital allocation plan. I know we hadn't looked at that for a long time. I think you answered that. Can you make any comments on that, or do you expect to see any changes? Are we doing that appropriately?
The cost allocation plans are extremely outdated. So when you look at what comprises that number, we've made efforts in the past to pull out some things such as city attorney. The city attorney, when it was an employee position, was allocated through the cost allocation plan. Now that it's contract, we can't charge through cost allocation because we should be direct charging based on how much time the city attorney spends in the enterprise funds. So to the extent that the city had been able to in the past, it appears that they tried to correct it to some extent. The council approved the issuance of the RFP for the cost allocation plan, user fee update, and impact fees. So we have that out now. We did receive questions from one vendor by the deadline on Friday. I think proposals are due May 11th or 13th, whatever that Friday is. I think it's the 11th. And we're hopeful that we'll have some good proposals to evaluate and bring a contract forward. I suspect that the cost allocation plans are low, and that's, in 2009, we didn't know about the PERS changes. We didn't know about the city as an organization looks very different from a staffing level. So I would expect we'd see them to go up quite significantly, but again, that's just a guess. So for this year, we kind of held the line and did CPI increases. You noted in the questions, Mr. Martin, that there was exception with Harbor, and that Harbor had remained steady for several years, and this year has gone up. That was a past arrangement made due to some lighting and Harbor being overcharged for lighting and kind of a true up of that over a course of several years, so they didn't do a CPI. The Harbor director and his staff were doing a pretty thorough analysis and presented us with enough information that we were convinced that they were getting charged for lights that they should not have been, but we are trued up as of 17-18, so they incurred the CPI increase as well, and then we've transferred those lights to the general fund to kind of right that ship. But overall, I think the cost allocation plan is towing the line until we can get a new updated study.
Okay. Thank you. No, I'm glad to hear that's in the RFP. They'll look at that as well. Okay, that's good. All right, does anybody have any other questions or comments or want to make any general comments? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'd like to inquire about the fact that you don't have any kind of forecast for interest income. I've never seen that. I mean, you have, the whole city has about 20 million. It varies between 19 and 22 million cash. So even if you only make 1% interest, that's $200,000 a year. Why would you budget zero?
So that's our total city coffers, if you will, and that is allocated at year end against all the different funds. So several of them are required to have interest legally allocated to them. So that's not all just general fund, interest money. The proportion of how that's allocated is based on fund balance. I think, and I'll let Sandy speak to it a little bit because she was here last year when she did the allocation, but because it's such a limited amount that goes to the general fund, is why I suspect it wasn't budgeted in the past. We could budget based on past year receipts. I think it's going to be $10,000 or $11,000 maybe, but I'll let her answer that because she'll know what she did for 17-18.
As Jennifer stated, the interest income is accumulated in the general fund in an undistributed account, and then at the year end, it's redistributed based on average fund balance to all the participating funds. And for general fund, the amount was $845 that came back to the general fund as their portion. So it's really an insignificant amount. And right now, all you're looking at is general fund budget. We do have a $3,120 payment that's coming in as an interest-only payment from Morro Bay Ventures on this note receivable that we're carrying on that Coral Avenue property sale. That's about $37,000 a year. It is remaining in the general fund, and it's because it's designated to repay debt on the fire station. Because once they pay off that note, all of that principal proceeds is to go to pay off the fire station debt, or part of it. So, that note is only going to continue until October 2019. So if we did want to budget about $37,000 of interest income for general fund, it might be appropriate. But otherwise, the amounts have been insignificant, specific to the general fund.
So you do budget interest income for the enterprise funds?
I am not, I believe that they do have interest income on their line, but again, it's hard to estimate because the interest rates vary, and in the past, this is the first year that we've even had any particularly significant amounts that are distributed to the funds because the interest rates have been so low and the accumulation of cash, the money that's in LAIF hasn't been significant. So I think you're starting to see an environment shift a little bit that we might have better interest rates and it might increase. But I look back and I think 3 years ago, we only had $64,000 in interest for the city entirely to be distributed. So it was pretty insignificant to distribute to any fund or to anticipate and budget for. The next year was like 126. Last year was 126. And, I would expect maybe this year it'll be about that same amount to distribute to those other funds. But for general fund that you're focused on right now, it's, we could put $800 in if we wanted to, but it depends on our average fund balance for the year. But apparently the practice has not been to budget for interest in the past, based on my research.
To add to that, I have draft enterprise funds charts in front of me as we're preparing them to send out on Friday, and it does not look like interest was budgeted in the enterprise funds either, at least for 17-18.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On your legal fees, why is it that there are no legal fees charged to the wastewater project?
I think it's a good point, and at some point, I guess we should be, and maybe we should have been, the project's funded through the accumulation funds for right now, so if the sewer or water enterprise funds are paying for legal fees, that's reducing the amount available to the project. Once we get into loan, SRF or WIFI or whatever the funding source is going to be, we probably do need to be more specific with that. But since the funding source is our existing pot, I think that's probably why they haven't. I don't know for sure, but we could set up an account for legal fees and ask our attorney to bill out any time he's spent on it. I'm not sure, and Rob's still here, so I don't know how much in the past Joe's been involved in the WIFIA, or, certainly with consultation, but I'm not sure if it's been a significant amount for the wharf project.
It's probably been more in the last few months as we've been moving towards our design build contract than it has over the whole process. What we can do is add a line in our project for legal services and budget towards that. And then have our city attorney account for that time.
Okay, good.
So he's clearly been actively involved for years. It might have increased.
Microphone.
It might have increased recently, but he's clearly been very active. So what you're saying is they just haven't identified costs that would go to wharf. He's charging, but he doesn't isolate that. He's basically taking the wharf. He's taking the wharf costs and charging it to one of the 3 or 4 accounts that you've got there.
Well, so the attorney they set up their own accounts and they bill us for whatever they're working on. But the categories tend to be, there's a water category, a sewer category, and a harbor. And those get charged to the enterprise funds. And then there's general fund. And then if there's something kind of miscellaneous, he will set up a new code for that and it'll come through on his bills and we'll decide where it needs to get coded to in our system. But any time that's been spent on the wharf would have come through, I imagine, through the sewer fund, but I haven't looked at the detail of the bills to know if it's being charged to sewer or water.
Okay. And, by the way, thank you. And many of us can be very happy to see that in one spot. It's been a kind of a burr in our saddle for quite a while. We had heard it was more like $500,000 or $600,000. So this will certainly make people feel, not that 400 is a real nice number, but it's nice that we can easily now see it, which we have not been able to do for the last 5 years that I've been around. Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit of a caveat to that in full disclosure. I would suspect, and I believe some probably small ancillary legal fees out there that are not related to our city attorney. Perhaps if there's IA investigation or something in PD. They might have the small one that's contracted out. I'm not sure I captured all of those. I captured all of the costs that are budgeted for our city attorney, meaning Joe and his firm. Or at least I intended to, and I believe I did. Also, that number of 500,000, I think if we went back and pulled some prior years, city attorney costs are going to vary significantly from year to year. And that's going to depend on what projects are going on, what negotiations are happening with either our labor unions, with lease agreements at the harbor, for a variety of purposes. So if we looked at actuals, they may be closer to that in some years prior. But for budget purposes, the number that's presented is pretty consistent with what was budgeted in 17-18.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I wanted to comment on the format of the new budget, the individual department sections of the budget. And I really want to compliment you, Jennifer, and Scott, and all the staff for the way you have formatted the budget with regard to the individual departments, listing program purpose, an overview of the budget, the accomplishments, the objectives for future accomplishments, all of the statistics that are in here that show what the departments are doing. I think this really, and even the images in here that really put a face to the people that are actually serving the community in these departments. And I think this really tells the story of what the city actually does. And I think it provides a lot of information to the public, very positive information about what the city's actually doing. And I think it's great. I think this is a tremendous improvement over prior year budgets. And again, I really want to compliment you on that. Hopefully not being too effusive, but I really like the format that you're doing this in now, and I hope this continues because it really does tell a story here.
I just, thank you for that, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that it was a large undertaking, and probably in hindsight too much to try to do all at once. We're all really tired, but Sandy has tolerated me, yelling from my office, Sandy, what is this? And all of the departments, we gave them these formats, and it's completely different than what they've been asked to do in the past, and not one of them pushed back. They all gave us information. I think the intent is now the format's there, so we can expand on it and improve on it in future years in terms of adding more metrics. And, the goal is to really kind of meet all of those GFOA best budgeting practices so we can submit for maybe that budget award in a few years. We have a little ways to go, but we're on the track to do that. And that's kind of the goal. And really, Scott gave full go-ahead to do this, and the departments, without them cooperating and doing it, we compile the numbers. They gave us the data for their stats. So it really need to acknowledge them as well.
Well, when this budget's available on the city website for the general public, I would really encourage the public to go through this and read it, because it's not the boring tables of numbers and information that was in previous budgets. They can really get an idea from this what each department does, what they're accomplishing for the community. And I would encourage everybody to look at this and read it, because I think you can get a lot of information out of this, probably that people aren't aware of within the community.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll be more the case even in future years, because we'll build that history. So like you have the history of expenditures and revenues. We'll build the history with FTEs, so you'll see, next year you'll have 18-19 and 19-20 what's funded, and you'll be able to see what the staffing is. Same with the metrics. And then, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for the budget calendar, and I mentioned that in the staff report, but, you as a committee and you, Dave, developed that calendar based on the previous information. I think that collaboration is really helping to move all of this going forward, so thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'm sure we all echo Dave's comments. We really appreciate that, and I know when you work on the Open Gov, you'll tie that in, but he's absolutely right. Once we get the rest of these budgets in here, the enterprise, I think if you can put them on the website, that would really be helpful. In the past, we had to look through the general accumulated transaction ledger, and that's what I think, turns citizens off. They just can't sort through that, that kind of data. So excellent job, all of you.
Clearly, I mean, it's hard, I don't even want to go back and look at what last year's looked like. I mean, it was god-awful. Anyway, the other question I had, though, in general, is the transfers. When we see the other budgets for the enterprise funds, it'll probably make more sense. But is it fair to say that if we want to know what we're dealing with relative to revenues, if we took the, if you will, above-line revenues from each of the various sections and added them up, that's what our revenues are? The transfers just have to do with allocations. For example, IT services over to the people working on WRF or something like that. But if our transfers literally, though, we can, if you wanted to say what's the total revenue or the total expenditures, you'd add up the numbers above the line. Is that a fair statement when I go back into it?
Yeah, so what we're working on, we have a few final pages to finish up in terms of some of the other funds. Sandy's finalized, I think, CIP today, so we'll be proofing that tomorrow. And then the last piece is the total city summaries. So they'll look similar to what's in here for the general fund, but be all the funds. And we'll list all the funds. And as we were working on that today, we're kind of struggling with that, like only capturing the revenues or the expenditures and not intermixing transfers with that. So that's what we're trying to do, and hopefully we'll achieve that.
Get my last question. Particularly Mr. Heading has talked frequently about pointing out the impact of CalPERS and the interest rate, and basically telling us about doom, quite frankly, about what's coming. I guess I was expecting most of the numbers, if you go from last budget year to this budget year, they kind of are in the ballpark, up or down 10%. And reasons for that. The numbers he's talking about is like another 800, like a million, 800,000 to $1 million impact because of interest rate change. Is that in here, or will that? Where is that, and why aren't we seeing a pretty dramatic, oh my gosh, what are we going to do issue?
Yeah, so you're going to see that number. We were fortunate in some regards that you have a little bit of a reprieve for 18-19. If you look, and where you see that specifically is in the police department. So if you look at their salary and benefit line items from 17-18 to 18-19, you won't see, I think you actually see a little bit of a decrease, if I'm remembering. And the reasoning for that is that we paid their side fund off in 17-18. So we are going to actually realize a little bit of savings that will offset the other, what was the fire increase and the miscellaneous increase. We didn't account for the fire increase, so we're still budgeting, for that in here. But that reprieve, when we started going through and allocating out staffing, we spent a lot of time this year putting people in the funds that they're working. And we're in there for the amount of time that they're working. So Rob went through all of his staffing and said, where do these people spend their time, how much time, and where should they be funded? You could argue for the general fund, it doesn't matter so much. It's all general fund. My response back to staff on that is we want to know how much we're spending on street lighting, that program. We want to know how much we're spending on street trees, and staff time is included in that. So it's important for the general fund as well. Where you start to see variances is when we maybe haven't fully been charging out to other funds that we could or should have based on workload. So I'm partially funded in the IT fund. The general funds pays for that, but so don't the enterprise funds. So it's fair to share that cost to those funds. The assessment districts, the same thing. If we're spending staff time out at Cloisters, we should be capturing that in our budget. We should make sure that's the amount of time we're spending out there and charge that fund for that time. So we spent a significant amount of time making sure our staffing allocations were correct. That led to some general fund savings that we didn't have built into the 10-year forecast. And then that reprieve of kind of having the side fund for police paid off this year. The overall net PERS impact this year was $35,000. Next year, police alone is going up $100,000. And that's for anybody in a classic miscellaneous plan. We also looked at how we're allocating out the UAL, and that's that piece that's really driving that PERS portion, that $20 million of, and I'm not sure that's the right number, but of the unfunded accrued liability. That's what's driving everybody's PERS increases. When you get your actuarial reports, there's a number that's assigned to that UAL. There's also a percentage based on payroll. A lot of times, people use that percentage based on payroll, and I think the finance department's a great example of that. Our cost would go down because we no longer have any classic employees in finance. They're all tier 2 or tier 3. However, that UAL is based off the classic employees that used to be in finance. We're still paying for them. So finance shouldn't achieve a significant savings because there's no classics in there. We still need to help pay for the promises we made to the people that were here before. So we did go back through and recalculate how we were doing the UAL, and that helped spread costs differently among the various funds. So you will see the increases. They are coming. I'm thankful we had slight reprieve this year, and we have some time to figure out next year, and then 1920 and really 2021 is when I start to get a little bit of a heartache going. So.
I did have one question, which, what would, I wrote down my question, but maybe I could make one of them a little bit clearer. Under services, I assume all those are essentially contracts for consultants?
Yeah, and I did respond to the questions, but it was late in the day, so you might not have gotten it. I provided you with a list of all of the accounts that are categorized under services. So it's a long list of accounts. Consultant services, to be honest, some of them aren't typically thought of as service. There's utilities in there, but I gave you the listing of what kind of sums up under that. And I can print, you can have my copy when we're done if you'd like.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I just was, it posed a question in my mind, which I'm pretty sure that considering the relationship you have with your citizens, you're going to say, 21% of the money has gone to consultants. Who? And so, personally, I think it's appropriate. Everything I've heard is just who was the question which came in my mind. So I don't know, were you planning on, would you be able to add something that to the budget, or do you think it's going to be next year?
I don't, at this point, we can't change the categories of what those, subs are, services, supplies, salary and benefits. What we can do pretty easily is add into the glossary section services, and these are the accounts that are included. It'll just be the listing, probably in a little cleaned up format, but if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the other question which comes to your mind is not accounts, but say, Poon is quite a bit of money, and in the city attorney's quite a bit of money, and things like that. Who are we paying to review things or to be consultants? And so that's not necessarily we would need to put a dollar amount with each person there, but well, I'm sure considering what's gone on, the city attorney's fees would probably, you're going to want to advertise that so everybody can say, okay, we now know what it is, and half of them will lose it, and half of them will say, oh, is that all it is? So there is an interest on who is receiving contracts from the city.
Okay. Thank you.
And just real quickly on your oversight on the IT at 25%, it seems that's a little high, for a one employee. I trust, on the charge, remember? It just seems to me like if there's only one employee, the one IT employee, that you have to provide management oversight, that would be closer to 10% or something, I don't know, but.
Yeah, I based it off of what was done in the past. It was under the deputy city manager, and I think he charged 35% of his time, if I'm remembering correctly. It was higher than 25%. And
Oh, really?
I lowered
Okay.
it down probably after a few more months. I'll have a better concept of what the actual amount is.
Yeah.
But
You might want to
just
review
wanna-
that, unless you're running around hooking up data lines or network, but.
Chair, I hate to do this, but we do have a meeting
Okay.
at 6:30, the Wharf Public Forum, so we'll try to don't want to rush it too much, but we do want to get it set up.
I don't think we have too much more. He has one more on the operating budget, and we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, just, Jennifer, since you'll be getting the rest of the budget, I guess, done on Friday, then that will be sent to us somehow?
So if you're willing, I'd like to collect your binders back so we can kind of save on reproducing what's already been produced.
Okay.
And we'll fill in what we have. I've kind of reorganized the administration section a little bit, so I'll replace those pages. And then when we send them out to council on Friday, I'll send an email to you as well saying they're ready to pick up.
Okay, so considering that the council's going to have their budget study sessions on May 8th and 9th, what do you envision the work for this committee to be going forward in regards to budget?
So I think the plan is that we'll present the recommendation, we'll include the memo from your chair on May 8th or 9th, whatever day we get to kind of the Measure Q discussion. And then for our May meeting, I don't know where the council will be at that point with their review, but I think we could have a discussion about what council has commented and provided in terms of feedback on the budget, because the adoption will be in June, so there would be an opportunity to go back.
So if we do have questions in regards to the other funds that aren't yet in here, can we send those to you and talk about that at the next meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. And so anything else on item B3, or I'll close out item B3? And again, we will send you any questions on the enterprise funds. All right, so that brings us quickly to item B4. I don't know that we have any subcommittee update. Would obviously be this budget, and then I'll get with you on any of that. Is there anything else in closing? Will the May 8th and 9th meetings be televised, the budget workshops?
Yes, both will be televised.
Okay.
I think May 8th would start at 4 o'clock, and we're thinking May 9th, 4:30.
Okay, good enough, as long as we get notice. All right, so we'll get you our comments on the Measure Q and everything. I'll get you the memo by Friday. I'll get it to my colleagues tomorrow. Anything else in closing, please? No? Okay, I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you all for your participation, support, and help, and thank you, staff. Oh, put your names on the books when you give them back to her.